zones. And welcome to this webinar on how to pre-think assumptions. In this webinar, we're going to talk about one skill or focus on developing one skill, which is the ability to pre-think assumptions. Pre-thinking is a relatively advanced skill. Usually, you need to have some foundational skills if you are to pre-think properly. And those foundational skills are the ability to visualize information and the ability to build a logical structure. So in this webinar, we're going to first build those skills. And then on top of that, we're going to put our framework to pre-think. And then using that framework, we'll answer some of the most challenging questions that the test can throw at you. And my goal would be that by the end of this webinar, you have a thorough grounding in what pre-thinking is, so that when we give you a roadmap as to what to do next, you can take the next set of logical steps and build on your ability to visualize information and your ability to build logical structure, and so that you can apply the pre-thinking framework. Now, the questions that we usually do in this webinar, they are relatively hard questions. In fact, the last two questions that we'll solve in this webinar are probably the hardest questions that the test can throw at you. My goal over here is to make sure that I expose you to those questions. I expose you to the kind of complexities that answer choices bring about as you solve those questions. So if you get those questions wrong, don't be too hard on yourself. They're designed to make you learn, and hence we're going to do that. Okay, but before we do that, we've got 52 students in the webinar. I want to, for those of you who are not e-GMATers, who are just trying the free trial out, or who've not even tried the free trial out, I want to tell you we have a very comprehensive free trial. Whether you want to learn, SCC or RC, number properties, arithmetic algebra, or very soon data insights, you should be able to go and understand what is it that we offer, whether our learning style is aligned with the way you learn, whether our teaching style, is aligned with the way you learn, and so definitely check that out. And more specifically, in terms of critical reasoning, you have a chapter on introduction to assumptions. You also have 3 lessons on various pre-thinking on various kind of argument structures. So definitely do that. We also have a few diagnostic tests and so on and so forth. We have some upcoming free webinars. We have a free webinar on algebra. In this webinar, we're going to talk about inequalities and absolute value. That's exactly 24 hours from now. So for those of you who are morning people, this is perfect for you guys. And let me actually get my pen here. Just one second. So if you have not registered for the same, you can do that by clicking on this register now button. And then next week, we have a free webinar on GMAT RC. That is at exactly the same time, 9 a.m. IST. Lauren, for you at close to midnight or 11:30 p.m. Eastern time or so. Okay. With that, I have about 63 students here in the webinar. I want to kind of understand you guys a bit better. So I'm going to ask some questions. So I think first thing, have you heard of the GMAT focus? Yes, no. The new GMAT that's coming. Have you heard of it? And then my second question is going to be essentially, which exam would you prefer to take? Again, not the one that you're attempting, because most of you probably would be attempting the current GMAT, given that you probably are going to planning to apply in round 1. But if you had a choice, knowing the syllabus that you do today, which exam would you prefer, the current one or the focus edition? And then I'm going to put in a chat pod over here below this. So I also want you to give me your reasons as to why you would prefer one over the other. Let me just clear this chat pod so that we have that. Yeah, which one would you prefer? I have about 45% saying the focus edition, about 25% saying the current GMAT. Okay. You can really just say FS or FE, which is the focus edition, and CG as the current GMAT, and then put your reason so that we know which one, what's your preference. Okay, SC remove, no idea what GMAT focus is. Ayansh prefers probably the current one because he loves sentence correction. Shorter exam time. No AWA. Okay. Programs do not take, I so far, at least what I'm aware of, is just one program, that's Harvard, that's not going to accept the Focus Edition for its round two. They're still going to accept the Focus Edition for the 2+2, and it's just to remove confusion, because Harvard is in a very unique position with regards to they don't have a round three. Every B school that I know of, every B school worth its salt that I know of that has a round three, is accepting both the current GMAT and the Focus Edition. So, but other than Harvard, and again, that's just specifically for round two this year. Okay. And if you have no idea about the Focus Edition, then well, I'd really like to look at that as to whether they, about Ross. I would definitely reach out uh, 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 to the head of admissions to figure out if they really said that, why that is the case. Then, but I'm not aware of Ross preferring one over the other. In fact, I'm not aware of any school preferring one over the other, by the way. All right. And Vishruti, which other Ivy schools, according to you, other than Harvard, is not accepting the Focus Edition? You mean Wharton? When you say University of Penn? Okay, I'm going to look into that as well. Okay, all right, that's good to know. Perfect. But I really like what I'm seeing over here with regards to the preferences. But 73 students now, so let's get right into the webinar. So I want to get two more data points about you guys, and one is, what's your target GMAT score? And then for those of you who all right, so let's, while you're putting your answers, I'm going to start going through the results. When do people plan to take the test? But the biggest group here is those who haven't taken a date as of yet. That's about 44% of you. Then the next big group, I think it's a really nice increasing bar chart. In 46 to 75 days, that's about a quarter of you or so. And then it's about 30 odd percent of you are in that 0 to 45 days, and about 17% of you are looking at taking the test within the next month or so. So for those of you who have, even those of you who have 15 days, just by applying, by focusing on visualization, you're going to see a significant improvement in the performance overall. Now, with regards to the target GMAT score, we have an even split, 730 to 750 and 760 plus. And I think very soon I'd start to have GMAT focus scores here as well, given the preference that people have. And then with regards to, and we have about 16% of you in that 710, 720, and then a few of you in the 660 to 700 group as well. In terms of the current GMAT scores, 500 to 600, the biggest bracket here, 600 to 650, the next big bracket, and then we have two similarly sized groups in the 660 to 700 and below 500, and then we have a few folks who have 710, who already have a 710 or higher on the test. So welcome everyone, and with that, let's go right into the webinar pane. So as we go into the webinar pane, you'll see a few things. So you'll see a presentation pane which says Prethinking for Assumptions. Once the screen settles down for you, that's what you should be seeing. On the right-hand side, is a vertical bar which says a short answer question. I'm going to move that. That's a place where I'm going to post my questions and you're going to respond to those questions. I'm going to bring that back. So this is a place for my questions and your responses. Below the presentation, you have a Q&A or a question and answer pod. this is a place where you can ask your questions. They go in a queue, and that allows me to respond to those questions as well. All right, so with that, let's get started right with the webinar. I'm going to go and get started with the first piece. So in terms of your the agenda, this is what we're going to do. We're going to first discuss how do you approach CR questions today. Then we're going to do a pre-thinking exercise that will allow me to give you an introduction to what assumptions are, what visualization is, how do you go about thinking through a logical structure, and then what pre-thinking is. So this is what I call as the foundation part of the webinar. Then once we have a foundation, we'll build on that and solve two very, very challenging questions. Throughout this process, we're going to, of course, do pre-thinking, but we're also going to apply the negation test. And you're going to really see they're very, very closely linked. Pre-thinking is a much more efficient way of approaching assumption questions. Negation is something that you would use only if you're confused, which you shouldn't be if you do pre-thinking right. And then from this point on, we'll talk about what should you do next and where can you get more practice. Okay, at a very high level, what you see on the right-hand side is what we will do. Okay, let's talk about your current approach to critical reasoning questions. There are usually two methodologies that people use to solve critical reasoning questions. One is okay, but before we do that, I want to just tell you what pre-thinking is, because pre-thinking is a term is for some reason it's confused. People get confused with what pre-thinking is. They really call paraphrasing as the same as pre-thinking. So pre-thinking is thinking of one potential assumption in your mind in about 15 seconds before you look at answer choices. The three words that are bolded, each one of them is really important. The whole purpose of pre-thinking is to make sure that you understand the argument completely, you visualize the information presented to you completely before you start looking at answer choices. And the reason for that is that in CR questions as well as in RC, answer choices provide a lot of new information. They have a tendency to pollute your brain, and when you pre-think, you're able to prevent that pollution from happening. You're able to think through the argument properly, or think through the information in an RC passage, and are able to arrive at the correct answer much more efficiently and with a lot more certainty. Okay, we were the first company to define pre-thinking in this particular manner. Prior to that, people used a term called paraphrasing, which was the same as predicting the answer. Pre-thinking is not the same as predicting the answer. The assumption that you think of, the strengthener, the weakener, or the way you logically complete an argument that you may think of, is not what maybe they are in answer choices. But the very fact that if you're able to think of one assumption or one strengthener, it ensures that you get a thorough understanding of the argument, and when you do that, you're able to solve questions quickly. Okay. So there are two ways to solve critical reasoning questions today. One is where you read the argument, you go to the answer choices, and come back to the argument, do a back and forth till you narrow it down to the final candidate. That's methodology one. Methodology two is that you read the argument, focus on pre-thinking, and then after you've done pre-thinking, go to the answer choices, and you come back to the argument only if needed. So I want to know, which approach do you guys follow? Is it approach one or approach two, or methodology one or methodology two? So let me reopen the poll. My bad. Which methodology do you follow today? All right, I have 81 people here in the webinar. I have about 36 responses. I want to get to about 50 responses before I broadcast results. Which methodology do you follow? And again, there's no right or wrong answer today. If your methodology works for you, if it allows you to answer 70% of hard questions correctly, then that's good overall. So I have about 48 responses. 48, 49. Let's get one more before I broadcast results. All right, I have 50 responses. Let me end the poll, and I'm going to broadcast results. And you can see 62% of you use methodology one, where you do the back and forth, and 38% of you follow the pre-thinking approach. So my goal today will be for people who use methodology one. I want to motivate them to try pre-thinking. If you follow methodology two over here, then my goal really would be to make sure that you become a better pre-thinker, you become more efficient at it, you kind of figure out if you're faltering, where you're faltering. And I'm sure you're faltering, otherwise you won't be spending this time with me. Okay. Now, pre-thinking is a framework, and to apply any framework, you need to have certain skills. So what are the skills that are prerequisites for pre-thinking? One of the most important skills that's a prerequisite for pre-thinking is the ability to visualize information. Um, GMAT critical reasoning, has is usually two or three sentences, and every word in those sentences um, presents some critical information. For you to be able to understand that, I want you to build that ability to visualize the information. So where if you see the conclusion that says, hey, the sea wall is going to be able to sustain the waves generated by the hurricane, then then you should imagine a seawall, imagine a strong seawall, imagine a tall seawall, imagine waves rising, and no matter the height of waves, imagine that the wall is blocking those waves. I want you to imagine that overall. And if you can visualize that, if you can translate every word into a picture, then you'd find that solving CR becomes a lot more simple. The second thing is linking things. This is where we kind of ask you to build the logical structure. So as you read multiple statements, understand how statement one links with statement two. What's the logical connection? How that visualization builds upon. And once you do that, then the last piece, which is formulating the falsification question, which is the pre-thinking framework, becomes really, really, really simple. There are people who struggle with pre-thinking, and they really say, hey, we can't pre-think. Essentially, this is not where people struggle with. Where people usually struggle with is either here or here. And in the most challenging questions, sometimes I struggle with it as well. Let me just be very clear. And when I struggle, I go back to my visualization and say, did I visualize everything correctly? Because one thing that you have to really do is trust the test maker to say, hey, if there is a CR question, you'd be able to come up with at least one pre-thought answer, if not two, three, or four. And then the better you get at pre-thinking, the more answers you'd be able to come up with, and the faster you get there. I've had students who are able to solve hard questions in 90 seconds consistently with extremely high accuracy once they get to that stage. Now, with that, one thing that I want to tell you is that each one of you can pre-think assumptions, because as humans we are really good at logic. The problem really is that we don't focus on visualizing information, because of which we are unable to pre-think. So to prove my point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an argument that you think every day about, and and I want you to tell me what's the assumption here. This is a really simple argument. It's something that you don't have to visualize. It's something that you think about day in and day out. So here is the argument. Tell me, what does the author assume here? All right. With that, let me broadcast results. I have about 20 responses right now. You can really see, most of you have done it correctly. Ivy schools need more than 500, or they require a score higher than 500 or so. Someone said minimum 700. I don't know why minimum 700. That was not there. But yes, for those of you focused on the word 500, you guys are on the right part. You're thinking in the right direction. So essentially, what's happening in this argument, you're given a data point that Joe scored, 500, a certain number over here. And based on this, the author makes a prediction saying that Joe will not get admission into an Ivy League college. And as he's making the prediction, he's making a logical jump where the author says where the jump is, or the assumption really is that the score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League colleges. And an assumption is covering up that logical jump. Now, this aspect over here, someone like Joe, is really, really important. Why? Because in the conclusion, the author has used the word he. So the arguments about Joe, so the assumption has to be for someone like Joe. The author is not saying or is not predicting that the Prince of Saudi Arabia won't get into an Ivy League college with a score of 500. Okay. Now, what does this mean? So, with that, if what I want to really tell you is that each one of you can come up with assumptions if you understand the information that's presented to you properly. Now, with that, I want you to tell me what is an assumption. What's the proper, concise definition of an assumption? What is an assumption? I'm going to remove broadcast results. So you type in, you press enter, and I will get your response. But then, as I'll broadcast responses only after I get about 20 or so answers. I have about 14 answers, 16, 18. Okay, good. 20 answers. I'm going to broadcast results so you can really see premise whose truth is taken for granted, something that might likely to be true, something that's not mentioned in the argument but needs to be true. Good. A hidden premise, an unstated premise, a factor necessary for the logic to hold. Okay. Assumption is a type of prejudice. I've not seen the word prejudice used for assumption. That's the first. Assumptions make the conclusion true. All right. So lots of definitions. Only a few of them are what I would call as correct. Most of those definitions that you have are what I call as an approximation of what an assumption is. They're not a precise definition. These are the kind of definitions that would let you choose wrong answers. Okay. Sai, yes, we are recording this webinar, so you will get a recording in about 6 hours or so. Okay. So an assumption is an unstated idea that is required for the conclusion to be valid, or which, in other words, that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. An unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. So when you think about an author making an argument, um, the author uses data points to arrive at his conclusion. That's the whole point of making an argument, to further the conclusion, and which is why the author uses data points. But then the author doesn't provide all the necessary data points. There are some missing data points between the facts given in the argument and the claim that the author makes. And that those missing data points, one or more, are assumptions. Now, there could be, you can really come up with a ton of data points that are there between the between what the facts presented in the argument and the conclusion. The data points that are necessary for the conclusion to hold true are what we call as assumptions, and it's an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. So what it means is that a correct answer will satisfy two conditions. One is it will provide new information, which means you cannot infer the information presented in the argument from the factual part, the information presented in the assumption from the factual part of the argument. It will always provide new information. The second thing is it will satisfy this criteria. This must be true criteria. Now, I want you to visualize this information. So I'm going to use a visual. So think of this entire house as your argument, where the roof is the conclusion. Now, and this roof is supported by three pillars. Each one of them is a supporting statement which makes the roof stronger. Now, to figure out which one of these is an assumption, or it satisfies that must be true condition, what we're going to do is we're going to call them 1, 2, and 3, and then we're going to take statement 1 out. Now, when we took statement 1 out, the roof is definitely weakened, but the roof still stays upright, and which means statement 1 is not an assumption. Okay. Then we'll take statement 2 out, and the roof still stays upright. It's further weakened, but it still stays upright. which means statement 2 is not an assumption. Now we want to bring back statements 1, 2, and 3. And then if we take out statement 2, the roof caves in. And because removing statement 2 led to the roof caving in, statement 2 is functions as an assumption. This is what the definition of an assumption is. It must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Okay, or that's kind of what satisfying that must be true criteria is. Now, usually I don't ask people to write down a ton of things. In this webinar, I'm going to ask you to write down 2 things. One of them is the definition of an assumption. The second is going to be the format of the pre-thinking or the falsification question. So write this thing down. Why? Because GMAT CR is in many ways is like physics. If you understand the fundamentals of it, you can leverage those fundamentals to answer the most challenging questions that the test will throw at you. So an assumption is an unstated idea that is required or that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Write it down so that you can use that. Okay. In other words, an assumption is this essential pillar or so. So what does must be true mean? Because 90% of questions on the GMAT will focus on your ability to identify that must be true aspect of an assumption. What it means is that if the information provided by assumption is not true, then the conclusion can no longer hold true. Okay. So what I'm going to now show is how do you validate a statement and say is it must be true? Okay. So same argument over here. We're going to look at the answer that we came up with and really see why it satisfies the must be true condition. So when is a conclusion falsified? Conclusion's falsified when if Joe gets into an Ivy League school with a score of 500. Is that clear to everyone? If Joe gets in with a score of 500, then we can no longer say that he will not get into an Ivy League school. This means my conclusion will break down. Okay, so let's kind of apply this framework to figure out if an answer is the correct answer or if it is an incorrect answer. So the statement that we're going to evaluate is a score of 500 on the GMAT for someone like Joe is unacceptable to Ivy League schools or colleges. So we say, is that must be true, which means if this statement is not true, then will Joe get admission? So let's kind of see what happens if this statement is not true. Now, when you say a statement is not true, what you're automatically saying is that its negated instance is true. And I'm going to explain to you why that is the case. So when you say this statement is not true, what you're really saying is this can exist, which means a score of 500 for someone like Joe can become acceptable to Ivy League colleges. Now, if this happens, then does my conclusion break down? Absolutely. Why? Because if a score of 500 becomes acceptable to Ivy League colleges, then I cannot say with 100% if this becomes true, then I cannot say with 100% confidence that Joe will not get admission in an Ivy League college overall, and which is where my conclusion breaks down. Okay. So some of you may be asking, Rajat, how can you say that if a statement is not 100% true, then its negated instance automatically becomes true? Let's kind of look at some examples here. Okay. Let's look at this statement. Harvard has the best MBA program. And if you say that's not true, what you're automatically saying is that Harvard does not have the best MBA program, or what you're also saying is that an MBA program that's better than or just as good as Harvard exists. So are you not saying that if you say this statement is not true, then automatically what you're saying is this has to be true? Yes, no? Right? Similarly, let's take another one. John runs faster than David. And if you say this is not true, then what you're automatically saying is that, is David can be just as fast as or faster than John, or John does not run faster than David. Okay. All right. So this is the aspect of one must be true, which means if an answer choices must be true, then I'm going to see that my conclusion will break down in the presence of negated version of that answer choice. And this all stems from the fact, from the core definition of an assumption, that where an assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to be valid. Manan, you will receive the recording in an email, and you'll also see it on our YouTube channel. So if you've subscribed to our YouTube channel, you'll see the recording there as well. Okay. Now it also cuts the other way, which means if an answer choice is an incorrect answer choice, then the conclusion will not break down in the presence of the negated instance of that. And let's see a few examples here. Okay. So a score of 500 on the GMAT is not a good score. And we have to evaluate, is this a correct assumption? We're going to follow the same process and really say, hey, is this must be true? Which means, will my conclusion break down if this statement over here is no longer holds true? So we say if this statement is no longer true, then its negated instance is true, which means a score of 500 now becomes a good score. If a score of 500 is considered a good score, then will Joe get admission into an Ivy League college? Absolutely not. Why? Because when you look at the argument, what you're going to really see is the argument is not predicated on the fact as to whether you call the score of 500 a good or a bad score. It's just predicated on the score being a certain value. In other words, the logic of the argument won't change if you swap 500 with 700 or 750. The logic still remains the same. It's just the logic just establishes a threshold. Okay. Let's kind of look at another answer choice here. The quality of an applicant's essay does not play a significant role in deciding as to whether he gets into an Ivy League college. We want to really figure out, is this must be true? Let's look at this over here. Is this must be true? Now, we follow the same path to really say, hey, if this is not true, then what happens to my conclusion? So if this is not true, its negated instance becomes true, which means the quality of an applicant's essay starts to play or does play a significant role in deciding whether the applicant gets into an Ivy League college. Now, if that happens, will Joe get into an Ivy League college despite scoring 500? The answer is no. Why? Because even though he may have stellar essays, if he doesn't meet the minimum threshold, then he won't get into an Ivy League college, regardless of how good his essays are. Or in other words, the argument is predicated again on a certain Joe scoring beyond a certain limit. That's basically it. Admissions, essays or performance in the interview, those are not relevant as per the argument. Okay. So, what are the skills that we're going to focus on? We're going to focus on your ability to visualize information, whether it's the information given in the argument or in the answer choices. Then we're going to focus on the ability to build logic and then formulate the falsification question. Now, what we've done so far in the last 30 minutes is we've kind of built a foundation on what an assumption is, what visualization is. Now, we're going to use two more arguments to hone that, and then we're going to solve two challenging questions. Okay. Now, how does visualizing and understanding must be true help? For the correct answer choice, you'll see the conclusion break down in the presence of negated version of that choice. For the incorrect answer choice, the conclusion will stay intact. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to pre-think. I'm going to give you an argument. It won't have any answer choices. You just have to tell me, what does the author assume here? You're going to put your pre-thinking in the short answer pod, in this particular short answer pod. And then after you do that, I'm going to evaluate your submission. I'm going to go about pre-thinking the answer my way. Okay. So here's the argument. Here is the pre-thinking exercise. Get ready and let me know what you think. Okay. So you have 2.5 minutes. Read the argument, understand the conclusion, and tell me, what does the author assume here. Good luck, guys. I'm going to mute myself for these 2.5 minutes. All right, we have lots and lots of answers. That's really good. I'm going to broadcast results so you can still put those answers in. Thank you very much. Okay, some really exciting answers over here. Actually, very, very high quality answers, but four very high quality answers that I can see here. Um, and there are some other interesting answers, is what I would say overall. So let's kind of see what's going on over here, and how are we going to go about doing this. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to focus on understanding the conclusion, and as we do that, we're going to visualize the conclusion. We're going to assign some numbers, then we're going to build that logical structure, and then from that point on, we're going to ask the pre-thinking question. Okay. All right. So what's that pre-thinking question? What's the origin of this? Now it comes from that very definition of an assumption, where an assumption is an unstated idea that must be true for the conclusion to hold true. Um, which means that without an assumption, your conclusion will break down. Or in other words, an assumption is built around those scenarios, which where the conclusion breaks. Now, if you think about it, right? If you go back to our house example, where we had those essential pillars, if you were to build a house, uh, then uh, and if you had to figure out where to put in those essential pillars, the first thing you're going to really figure out is, where is it that my roof is caving in? And if you figure out where the roof is caving in, then you'd put those pillars over here. Does that make sense? Figure out where the roof is caving in and then put pillars over there. That's kind of the whole idea of pre-thinking is as well. Figure out the scenarios where your conclusion breaks down, and then if you find once you find those scenarios, your assumption very simply is that those scenarios do not exist. That's essentially your assumption. Why? It all comes from this must be true aspect of the definition of an assumption. All right. So, what's the falsification question that we're going to ask? Well, the question that we're going to ask is, under what circumstances, given the facts and the argument, we're always going to respect the facts and the argument, will the conclusion break down? As I said, this is going to be the second thing that I'm going to ask you to write down. Why? Because you're going to use this again and again and again. The moment, if you visualize the conclusion, if you build that logical structure, and then you ask that this question, you're going to find, if you're able to do all three well, you're going to find assumptions jumping out at you. Okay. Um, with that, let's kind of go and focus on this question. So I want you to tell me in this question, which statement is my conclusion? I'm going to put in a poll over here. 1, 2, or 3. Which statement is the main conclusion here? Which statement? I want to see about 50 responses again. I have about 30 responses. Which statement is the main conclusion? 37, 40, 45. Oh, I have 50, close to 50 responses, I believe. Yes. Yeah, I have more than 50 responses. When I end the poll, you can see 48% of you believe statement 2 is the main conclusion. You guys are absolutely correct. But 35% of you believe statement 1 is the main conclusion. And you can really see that understanding of what a conclusion is wrong. Some of you also believe statement 3 is the main conclusion. Now, in an argument, your main conclusion is what the reason why the author has written the argument. It's the idea that the author wants to further from this particular argument. And when you look at this argument, you'd see that the idea that the author wants to promote from this argument is statement number 2. Clearly, the difference between professors in the tenure system and other full-time lecturers has to do with the reward system for the former. So the author is saying is, blame the reward system for the difference. Now, a lot of people think statement 1 is the main conclusion because it has this word concludes. Now, remember, the main conclusion in an argument is always by the author of the argument. This conclusion here is not by the author, it's by the paper. Statement 1 actually sets the context for the entire argument. It's a factual statement. We're not going to dispute that. Statement 3, on the other hand, is written to make statement 2 more believable. So 3 is written to make 2 more believable, which means 3 is a supporting statement for the main conclusion. So 3 is what we call as a premise, 2 is the main conclusion, 1 is the context. Okay, so statement 1 is your statement 3 is your main statement 2 is your main conclusion. I'm sorry. Okay, now let's kind of visualize the conclusion. Okay, now one thing which is really important for you to understand is that the author does not dispute the facts. The author will never dispute the facts presented in the argument. The author will always reason the facts, but not dispute the facts overall. So if you were to really visualize the conclusion, what the author is really saying is, hey, full-time lecturers, they help 70% of the students do better. Tenured professors have only 40% of the students do better. And then the reason for that is the reward system. Okay. All right. Now, I want you to tell me one other thing. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? I'm going to put in a poll question here. Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Is it just tenured faculty, just lecturers, both, or neither? Whose reward system does statement 3 talk about? Again, I'm looking for 50 responses. I have 46. Oh, I have 50 responses. That's wonderful. Let me end the poll. I absolutely love the enthusiasm that this group has. So 66% of you are absolutely correct. Statement 3 talks about um, the reward system for just tenured faculty. It doesn't say anything about the reward system for full-time lecturers. So statement 1 is absolutely correct. This, a lot of people are confused because of this word greater, and because greater is a comparative word, they think that it's focusing on both lecturers as well as tenured professors. Greater is just comparing the emphasis on research versus the emphasis on teaching. What it's saying is maybe there's a 70% emphasis on research and a 30% emphasis on teaching. That's all that this is saying. Beyond that, it doesn't say anything about the reward system for full-time lecturers. Is that clear to everyone? Okay. All right. Now, in terms of the structure of the argument, statement 1, as I said, sets the context. Statement 2 is your main conclusion. Statement 3 is written to make statement 2 more believable. It provides those details about the reward system for professors. Okay. So with this data and with this understanding, we're now going to form a falsification question. Again, remember the general structure of the question, or the framework for the question, is under what circumstances, given the facts and the argument, will the conclusion break down. So it has 2 fill in the blanks that we need to do, 1 and 2 over here, and we're going to fill both of these in. The translation of this is, under what circumstances would the reward system not be responsible? So this is 2 and this is 2 over here. Can you see the mapping? Conclusion breakdown to reward system not be responsible. Can you see the mapping? 2 to 2. Conclusion breakdown is reward system not responsible. Okay, we're just putting a knot over there. Okay. Given that, so this is 1 over here, and this over here is 1. Okay. Can you see the mapping of 1 to 1? Okay, good. All right. So Varun has a doubt. He says, but for full-time lecturers, the reward system does apply wherein they score lower on research. So why not both? Good question, Varun. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually share the argument over here. And again, this is color coded. Read the argument again and tell me, how do you infer that that full-time lecturers score lower on research? Can you infer that full-time lecturers do score lower on research, or can you infer the performance of full-time lecturers on research based on the information provided in the argument? Yes, no, and everyone can participate? Not really, right? No. So what the question that you asked was built on a an inference that you can't draw from the information provided to you. Okay, it's not implicit. Okay, and this is where, when you look at the e-GMAT CR course, assumption comes after inference. Why? Because you've got to know what you can infer from statements. You got to know what you can visualize based on statements, and then only you can come to assumption. And then, of course, evaluate, strengthen, weaken, or so. Okay, so let's go back. Ask the pre-thinking question. The pre-thinking question is, again, under what circumstances will the reward system not cause the difference between tenured and non-tenured? Again, remember, we are not disputing the difference. We're just saying in what circumstances can we not blame the reward system, given what we know that the reward system for tenured faculty places greater emphasis on research. And as we do that, we come up with some possible scenarios. One is, if non-tenured faculty has an identical reward system, then we can't blame the reward system. Or if most tenured professors don't act as per the reward system. Okay. Do you agree? If either one of these scenarios is true, my conclusion breaks down. I can't blame the reward system. If that is the case, then my assumptions are non-tenured faculty do not have, uh, 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 an identical reward system, or most tenured professors should act as per the reward system. And both of these are good assumptions. And actually, a few of you came up with these as well. So that's really good to know. Okay. So this was essentially a way to tell you that if you focus on understanding what's given to you, if you visualize that, if you link it and ask that falsification question, assumptions start jumping out at you. And by the way, if you're able to do just one, that's good enough. You don't even need to do two. Okay. Now, a lot of you are probably concerned about pre-thinking and timing. How many of you are really saying, man, this is good, I understand what I'm seeing, but how long is it going to take? This seems to be quite a few steps, and I've heard lots, people tell me about shortcuts and blah, 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 blah. First of all, does this seem logical? Okay. And seems complicated. Yes, right now you've just done one example, so it will seem complicated, but by the end of this lesson, you'll start to get a hang of it. Okay. Took 5 minutes. It will. Have you guys learned anything in terms of, have you guys learned a skill in the last 6 to 8 months or so? Whether it's, playing badminton, getting better at a sport, getting better at coding something, getting better at, getting a degree. And some of you may be doing your CA, which you should write it down. If you're saying yes, if you've gotten better at anything, and when I say get better, substantially better at anything, what is it? Swimming. Okay, sequel. What else? So if you've gotten better at swimming, go back to the point when you started learning swimming, when you had to learn the fundamentals of breathing, when you had to build in your body strength to be able to kind of push the water back. How was it? Driving, yes, absolutely. I'm going to take just an example of swimming. The first time, the first couple of weeks you learn swimming, your lap time is usually fairly long. You've got to take breaks. But then as you get better and better at it, you're able to do two things. One is you're able to do way more laps continuously. The second is your time per lap goes down. Okay. If you've gotten better at squash, if you've truly learned squash the right way, one of the first things you do is you learn strokes. You learn drives down the wall. You learn boasts, which is where you hit the ball on the wall, and then it hits the side wall and the back wall, and then you pick it up. And the right way to learn is where you make sure that you get the movement right, which means that the initial few strokes, the initial few weeks, you do slow boasts, and then once you get the movement right, you improve your pace, you improve your accuracy tremendously. The same is with this. If you're not if you're not forced to go slow at anything, then you're not building a skill. For those of you who've learned how to build logic, the first few sets of logic that you would have built in any language would have been relatively simple and would have taken a lot longer. And then as you got better with the syntax, as you got better with just thinking through in that language, you would find that doing things becomes a lot faster. Is is that true? Is that what happened with you guys? Your speed, your efficiency improves tremendously. It's not just about incremental improvement that I'm talking about. The same is true with this. Okay. And let me just say this, if these methods didn't work, we wouldn't account for 60%. In fact, if you look at the last 3 months, I think that number is closer to 70% of all 700 plus scores reported on GMAT Club. Okay, which means everyone else combined, and you see the list over here, counts for just 40% of 700 plus scores. Okay. Um, okay. Now, how will you feel as you go through this? One of the first things you're going to really see is that, let's say you're today at this point where your accuracy to answer questions is medium, your time to answer questions, your accuracy is low, your time to answer questions is medium. So on the y-axis you have accuracy, on the x-axis you have time to answer questions. The first thing that's going to happen is, as you start doing pre-thinking, your time to answer questions is going to go up. It might go up to 3.5-4 minutes per question. Your accuracy will go up as well. But what you're going to focus on is you're going to say, hey, man, why the hell am I worrying about this? I'm already taking long to answer questions. I struggle with timing. Let me give up on this. Most of you will not focus on 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 essentially the fact that you're able to solve more questions correctly. Now, as you continue to do pre-thinking, two things will happen. One is your accuracy will continue to improve, but your time to answer questions will actually come down. You can see on the x-axis, number 3 is towards the left of number 1. Okay. Once you do this, this is when you're going to reach what I call as the hysteresis within critical reasoning. Once you get to 3, there's no stopping you from that point. You will solve every CR question using pre-thinking, and then as you do that, you're going to continue to get better. You're going to continue to solve questions more and more quickly. Your accuracy is going to continue to go up. And this is very similar to what happens in any skill when it comes to building logic, when it comes to writing longer code, when it comes to being able to play a longer rally, or when it comes to doing more laps in swimming. Okay, the process of learning works this way. Now, what determines how well you go from 1 to 2? The core thing that determines is how well you focus on understanding whatever you're solving. If you focus on understanding a lot more, and if your starting ability is at a reasonable level, you're going to go from 1 to 2 in about 10 to 12 arguments. If you're at a very low starting ability, or if you just rush through these first 12 questions, you're going to take a lot longer. You're going to need many more examples. If you do both low starting ability and rush through questions, not focus on visualizing information, you're going to take way longer. You will most likely be the person who gives up and goes back to shortcuts and settles in with that 50th percentile, 60th percentile ability in critical reasoning. Okay. And you will see without focusing on visualization and pre-thinking, you're going to find it hard to answer difficult questions. Okay, here are some people who applied this. This is a guy who really said, understand the passage completely. Equally important, pre-think and answer before looking at answer choices. But this one word will probably have the most impact on your GMAT score. Another guy said, answer CR questions as if there are no answer choices. This guy went from a 20th percentile in CR to a 95th percentile in 20 days. CR was the only thing that was holding his his score back just because he started doing pre-thinking. All he had to do was force himself to do it. Now, he had the ability up front. He was someone who started, who had high ability in SC, high in RC. CR was his only problem. So as soon as he tuned himself, he was able to get there. Okay. Harshit went from a 520 to a 740. He says pre-thinking primes the mind, and we are constantly on our toes while reading an RC paragraph or a CR question stem. Apart from comprehending the passage, we keep on speculating that in which direction the passage will orient or what logical jump has the author taken. Again, this is the journey that you will go through. If you don't go through this journey, you're doing something wrong. Okay. All right, with that, we're going to solve another question. This is a question that seems fairly simple, but if you do not pre-think, if you do not focus on the logic of the argument, you will falter on this question. The answer choices here are very confusing. All right, so here is here's your poll. You will have answer choices here in this question. Here is the question. Good luck, guys. You have about 2.5 minutes to solve this one. All right, get those answers in. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to broadcast results and see how you guys have done. So you can see choice E is the most popular, choice B is the next most popular choice, and then choices C and D are somewhat popular. So, how was this question? Okay, easy, 700 level, seemed easy. Easy with a small trick, a bit tricky. All right, not difficult, doable, not tough. All right, good. That's good. C and appear to be giving the same information, critical type. All right. Okay. So it's good that you found it easy. That's wonderful. Uh, so what's going on over here? Let's kind of do this. We want to finance road repairs, and the Highway Commission is considering a 10 cent, 50% increase to this price. And the commissioner says, hey, that this increase will increase the annual revenue by at least 50%. So when we think about um, uh, increasing annual. When you think about the conclusion, this is the conclusion over here, which is the annual revenue generated by toll highway will go up by at least 50%. So if last year the annual revenue was, so this is last year, the annual revenue was $1 million, then this year the annual revenue is going to be at least 1.5. So it could be 1.6, 1.7, or even higher. Okay. Now, how do we estimate annual revenue? You have the argument over here. How do we estimate annual revenue? Can you guys type in? How do we estimate annual revenue? Annual revenue is essentially the toll per mile multiplied by the total number of toll miles, right? Okay, price per mile. Now, what we already know is that we are going to increase this by 50%. And what we are doing is predicting that this would go up by 50%. So, what's a falsification question? A falsification question is, under what circumstances would the annual revenue not increase? With the conclusion breakdown? What is the conclusion breaking down? Annual revenue not increasing by 50%, 50%, provided that the toll per mile has increased by about 50% or so. So, what's the only scenario in which that's going to happen? What's the only scenario in which this is going to happen? That, hey, we know this is going to go up by 50%. What's the only scenario in which this will not go up by 50%? If the total number of miles goes down. Yes, that's the only scenario. Okay. That's essentially what we need to pre-think. All right. So with that, let's kind of look at what you guys did over here and how you guys polled. A lot of you chose choice B. Hold on. A lot of you chose choice B. I'm not going to go towards choice A. Very few people chose choice A. People chose choices C and D as well. Choice E is the correct answer. So what does choice B say? Choice B says that the total number of trips made on the toll highway per year will not decrease from its current number. So whenever you look at invalid and answer choice, just visualize it. What it's saying is, if last year we made 1,000 trips, this year we will at least make 1,000 trips overall. That number will not go down to 950, 960, or 900. Now let's say if this number does go down to 960, does that mean that the total number of miles traveled on toll highways will go down? No. Why? Even though the number of trips may go down, what can compensate for fewer trips? Average length of the trip, longer trips here, right? If the number of miles per trip increases. Now, so does this mean this is a must be true? No, it doesn't satisfy that must be true condition. This choice B is not required for the conclusion to hold true. It's a very nice strengthener, but it doesn't satisfy the must be true condition. Okay. People who chose choice B, is this clear as to why choice B is not correct? Okay. Choice B is an excellent strengthener. Okay. But it's not a good must be true condition. Okay. It's an excellent strengthener. If this were a strengthened question, choice B would be a correct answer, but this is an assumption question. It doesn't satisfy the must be true condition, and hence it's not the correct answer. Okay. Remember, always ask yourself, is it must be true, or will the conclusion break down if this answer choice is not true? Okay. Choice E, which is our correct answer, attacks that total distance and hence is correct. Okay. Choice C talks about the average length of the trip. And it says the average length of the trip, will either remain the same or will increase. Now, what happens if average length of the trip goes down? What could offset the reduction in average length of the trips? Average length of trip, what could offset? Number of trips. Yes, B and C in many ways are complementary, right? Okay. Any doubts on this question? Perfect. What were your key learnings? What were your takeaways from this? But half of you got it wrong. The other half got it right. What were your takeaways? What habits will you change? What will you do more than what you currently do? Visualize more. Okay. What will you visualize? Logical thinking. Identify assumption and conclusion early on. Okay. Ask yourself, is this must be true? Good. Study the question better. Good. I really like the fact that you didn't use the words faster. Better is the most apt word. Um, increase the use of core skills. Good. That's really, really nice. Okay. Now, questions 4 and 5. These are the last two questions in the webinar. What did I say about these questions? If you remember, what did I say? For those of you who've been there, they're going to be some of the most challenging questions. So don't be, these are official questions. Don't be really hard on yourself if you don't get them right. It's not a judgment of how you're going to do. It may be a judgment of where you currently are, but it's not a judgment on your potential. Okay. So for some of you, they will be easy, but for others, they won't be. And that's absolutely okay. All right. Now we're going to do questions 4 and 5, as a quiz, which means that you're going to do them one after the other, and then we're going to uh, analyze those. So because they're hard questions, I don't want to time you guys. So what I want 40 of you to do is click on not answered. And this is something that we're going to do in the algebra webinar tomorrow as well. So click on not answered, 40 of you. And then once you choose an answer other than this, I'm going to call time. So here's question number 4. Good luck, guys. All right, get those answers in. About 70% of you are done. I'm going to give you another 15 seconds. Five, four, three, two, and one. I'm going to end the poll. Come on, get those answers in. I'm going to open it for another 2 seconds. Some of you wanted to put those answers in. All right, I'm going to broadcast results. And then we're going to go to our next question. Remember, we're going to go through these as a quiz. All right, you know the drill. Click on not answered. This one, thankfully, is a slightly easier question. All right, I have about 40 people who said not answered. I'm going to remove broadcast results. And here is your question stem. Good luck, guys. All right, 80% of the group's done. Let's get those answers in. 3, 2, and 1. I'm going to end the poll. broadcast the results. So this time you can see we only have 3 people who've not yet chosen an answer, but overall the participation is really good. I'm really happy with this. Okay, let's hide this. How do you feel? How were these questions? Made me think. The last one was hard. Okay. Confusing. Little hard. Good. And then, as I said, they are harder than what we've done so far. They're some of the most challenging questions. The second one was easy. The first one had convoluted answer choices. Yes, it had. And the first one's definitely more challenging than the second one. Absolutely. Every question that you've done in this webinar, barring the first one, is a 700 level question. Yes. Just as a threshold for 700 level question, a 700 level question is one, or a difficult question. There's no 700 level question. We kind of call it a 700 level question just because we think of 700 as a hard thing, but they're called hard questions. So any question where where you have a reasonable number of people and the accuracy is lower than is 50% or lower is the hard question. Yep. Most people, of course, who get a score of 700 or higher, or who score 80th percentile or higher, their accuracy on hard questions is upwards of 55%. Yes, the new GMAT format does have CR as a critical part. So CR and RC don't change on the new GMAT format. SC is gone, and then they've done a wonderful thing with data insights. Super excited about it. Extremely relevant to what you do at B schools overall. I think the new GMAT's way more superior to the new GRE, and I think it will be a lot better predictor of your performance at B schools. And my guess is that that once consulting companies understand the new GMAT, they're going to really want to know more about it. Q4 is where the earliest you can take. So I think my guess is the 2nd of October is when you can take the new test. Okay. With that, let's get to answering these questions. So what's going on over here? Let's kind of visualize this conclusion. In the first question, the author says the number of V's, wordlanders. There's no point pronouncing this completely. Wordlanders receiving special program information did not increase significantly during this time period. Okay. So a few things that I want you to remember about this. Okay. One is this always talks about wordlanders. The second thing is we are only concerned about special program information. The third is we are only concerned about the period 94 to 96. We're looking at the change from 94 to 96. We're not concerned with anything else in this argument. Okay, really remember that piece overall. Now, what is the author saying? The author is saying that, hey, if 1 million people received special program information in 94, then that number in 96 is 990k, 1.01 million, but it's more or less 1 million, give or take. Okay, that's what the author is saying. Okay, so let's kind of build the argument structure overall. So this is your main conclusion, where the author is saying that the number of wordlanders receiving special program information is more or less the same. It probably did not increase significantly. Why does the author say that? The two reasons for the author to say that. One is that the number of receiving radios, these are radios that people have, that number is the same, more or less the same as it was there in 94. So 94 and 96, that number is similar. The number of transmitting towers have gone up tremendously, more than doubled over here. And you can see the word however connecting these two things, because the words however is connecting these two things. We can really say that this piece of information, statement 2, goes against the conclusion. Statement 3, of course, strengthens the conclusion. Why? Because we can really see statement 3 strengthens the conclusion. That's very clear. If you have same number of, if you have very similar number of people with these receiving radios, then of course it supports the conclusion that number of wordlanders receiving special program information didn't change. And because 2 and 3 are linked by however, you can infer that 2 and 3 are in opposite directions, which means if 3 is supporting the conclusion, 2 most likely kind of goes against the conclusion. It's what I call as an anti-premise. And then statement 1 says that radio stations with RDS technology they have this special thing characteristic called they broadcast the special program information, and you need an RDS radio for that to receive. So essentially, if you want to get SPI, special program information, then you need a transmitting tower and then a receiver. So you need a mated set. That's what statement 1 says. Is the structure of argument clear? Is the structure of argument clear to both of you? To all of you, I'm sorry. Yes, perfect. Okay. So with that, let's kind of pre-think. This is the logical structure. The context says to receive RDS programming, you need RDS radios from 94 to 96. Number of radios more or less remain unchanged. The number of transmitting towers increase. And based on this, the author says very few additional worldlanders receive RDS programming. Okay. Now, we're going to ask the same falsification question that we frame the same falsification that we usually do, which is under what conditions will there be a significant addition to the number of people receiving RDS programming if we have very few additional radios and a lot more transmitting stations? So what are the scenarios in which we can break this conclusion? Why don't you tell me? If new towers came in where people already had the radio, yes, that's a really good thing. If new towers, if in 94 people had the radios but had no reception, now new towers came in now, they already had the radios. Very, very good. What else? What else can break the conclusion? Think a bit more. If they receive RDS programming from some other means, if that is true, they can. But then remember, an answer choice in a CR question will not go against the constraints, will not go against the facts given in the argument. So you can't really go against this. The argument tells you to receive RDS programming, you need that mated pair. Okay, so while it's the correct answer, it is not going to be correct on the GMAT. Why? Because you're going against the facts given. You're going against the constraints. It's like saying if your boss tells you, hey, you need to generate $10 million worth of revenue with $3 million worth of investment, and you really give him a business plan saying, hey, I'm going to generate $10 million worth of revenue with $5 million worth of investment. If you don't obey the constraints, the output is not as relevant. Okay. Multiple listeners use the same radio. Absolutely true. If people per radio go up, then also we can get more people listening to RDS programming. If we start putting these radios in Starbucks, we can have more people listening to RDS program. Okay. Good. I'm really glad you guys came up with these scenarios. Both these scenarios look logical. Both these scenarios make sense. Okay. If these are the scenarios that break my conclusion down, my assumptions are new stations don't increase my coverage, people per radio remain more or less the same. Everyone good with this? You can see how we went through the jargon and we were able to come up with two good answers. Either one of them would suffice. I'll give you about 5 seconds to look at these. Okay, let's look at our answer choices. I'm going to show you how you guys polled over here. This is how you guys polled. Choice A and choices A and D were very popular, but B was reasonably popular as well, as was C. The only choice that wasn't popular was choice E. Okay, choice A is my correct answer. Choice A, does focus on this part over here or this part over here. Okay, what choice A says is few, if any, of the RDS radio stations that began broadcasting after 94. So this, from here to here, these are the new radio stations. A broadcast, few, if any, means almost none. Okay, few, if any, of the RDS radio stations that began broadcasting after 94. I'm going to just clear this out so you guys have this. Broadcast to people with RDS equipped radios living in areas not previously reached. So what it's saying is that almost none of the new radio stations increase the coverage of RDS programming. Or in other words, let me just put in a whiteboard. Has a whiteboard over here. And this is from my previous session. I'm going to just make it again. So what they're really saying is that, let's say this is my Verland, and earlier these crosses represent people over here. Okay, these crosses represent people, and my stars represent radio stations. These were radio stations that existed in '94 with RDS programming, and you can see on over here towards this, there are no radio stations with RDS programming. What they're really saying is all the new RDS stations, which I'm going to put in blue, are put over here. These are the new RDS stations that are put over here. They are not put in this side where people earlier did not have, and which is required. Why? Because if that is the case, if you put the new stations where people had the right kind of radios but did not have RDS stations, then you're increasing the coverage, and that breaks our conclusion. Is that clear why this is the correct answer? Okay, we're going to go through every answer choice, by the way. If you chose another answer choice, if you want to figure out why that's incorrect, we're going to do that. But first, I want you to make sure you understand why this is the correct answer. You can also see how you're visualizing not only the argument, but also the answer choices here. Okay. Choice B says, in 1996, most Verlanders who lived within the listening area of an RDS station already had a radio equipped to receive RDS. I want to focus on this word most. So what this is, and what does most mean? What does the word most mean here? Or most in general mean, not just here? Most means more than 50%, absolutely. Right? Most means more than 50. So 50.1, 51, 52, 60, 70, 80. Most also means all. So any range between 50 and 100% is most. Okay, so this, if this is my 50% point, everything over here is most. All right. So this is, and so whenever you see a term like most, always assume a number. So what this is saying is that, let's say most translates to 70%, because that's a possibility over here. What this is saying is, in 1996, 70% of our landers who lived within the listening area of a radio station already had an RDS radio. So my question really is 70% required? Do we need that? Is that must be true? Now, the answer to that is no. Why? Because when you think about what the argument is about, it's about the change in number of people receiving RDS programming. In other words, if in '94, only 20% of people had an RDS radio, and in '96, the same 20% had an RDS radio, then my conclusion will still hold true. Or in other words, I do not need most. Or in other words, my 70% or most is not must be true. Okay. Now, if most already had that, of course, then it makes the conclusion stronger, but it's not required. It's not a must be true. In many ways, this is similar to choice B in highway miles, where we said, hey, the number of trips has not reduced. Now, that would be nice if the number of trips remain the same, but is that required? Absolutely not. Okay. If a statement B said almost all instead of most, would it be true? Absolutely not. Even then, it won't be true. What you have to understand is that the conclusion is about the change in number of people between 94 and 96. Okay. It's not about the absolute number in 94. It's not about the absolute number in 96. Okay. In other words, if I were to really put that argument, if I had an argument, and let me actually write it down. Let me put in my notes pin here. Let's not use 1994. Now, if that's my claim, then can I say that is that an assumption? Is this statement an assumption? Yes, no. Is this statement an assumption? No. Why? Because when the claim that I'm making is about the comparison of the amounts, then an absolute amount has no relevance over there. Okay. In the same way, when the conclusion here and the conclusion in this argument is about a change in number, then the absolute percentage of people having an RDS radio has no relevance in that context. Does that make sense? And that's where visualizing the conclusion is very important. Choice C talks about what happens when you equip a radio station with RDS technology and the impact on the listening area. Again, not relevant to us. Why? Because the argument tells us you need RDS technology if you want to, in a radio station, if you want to transmit RDS programming. So if it does have an impact on the listening area, it impacts the non-RDS aspect of programming, which my conclusion is not relevant. Which is not relevant to my conclusion. So this is something which I'm going to reject right away. Okay, let's look at choice. Choice was, I think, the most popular answer choice. What D for Delta says is, in 1996, Verlanders who did not own radios equipped to receive RDS could not receive any programming from radio stations that began broadcasting after 1994. It's a lot of people fell into this trap. This is not relevant at all. Why? Because it talks about people who do not have the right kind of radios. It also talks about radio stations um, who that do not have the right kind of technology, who did not own radios equipped to receive RDS. Do we care about these people who don't have the right kind of radios? Should we care about them? As per the argument, no. Could not receive any programming. Do we care about any programming? No, we only care about RDS programming. Because of this, choice D is absolutely wrong. Now, a lot of you chose choice D. What made you gravitate towards choice D? Okay. But can you see that right now that it's not relevant? Okay. You eliminated the rest and were left with D. Okay. All right. Choice E talks about the same kind of programming, not relevant to us. And yeah. So, takeaway from this. What's your takeaway? What is it that you're going to, again, enhance to get such questions right? Again, this was a challenging question. There was a lot to decipher, but it didn't test any new skills. It tests the skills to another depth. think about it, and then I want you to write it down, and then we're going to discuss this after we discuss our final question. Okay. Now, let's focus on this question. Few is equal to almost none. Pre-thinking is important. Visualizing is most important. Break the conclusion. Good. I really like that. Please, please, please write those down. Please, please, please practice this after the session. And for those of you who've not gone through the free trial, make sure you go through it. All right, let's look at this question. Last year, we didn't send anything for incineration or burning, for recycling. So as a result, we sent everything for incineration. Everything was burned. Okay. Now let's assume one trash can is one truckload. How many truckloads did we burn last year? Can you count the number of trash cans? 10. Yes, absolutely. We burned 10 truckloads last year. And this is a question where you see the power, you'll see the power of visualizing information. This year, what are we going to do? We're going to recycle stuff. So we're going to send a fewer truckloads. How many truckloads are we going to send over here if we collect the same amount of refuse? 5. Yes, half as many as what it was last year. Now, I want you to focus on the argument, and then I want you to answer this question. If this year we collect 10 times as much refuse, so this is 10x as much refuse as was last year. So this is 10 times as much refuse. Then how many truckloads do you think we will send this year? If we collect 10 times as much refuse, then how many truckloads do you think we will send this year for incineration? And this is really irrelevant. Excuse me. Three, two. Come on, you all did this question. 3, 2, and 1. Let me end the poll. And I'm going to broadcast the results. And along with these results, I'm also going to broadcast how you guys polled for this question. Here's how you guys polled, because you may not remember what you chose. You should now be able to see what you chose. The D and E, quite popular. C was really popular as well. Okay. You can see how people have polled. Choices D, E, and A are really popular. The correct answer here is A, 5 truckloads. And let me explain this. And this is where visualizing information is really important. And this is what I call as the next level of visualization. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse to reduce, to is a purpose word, to reduce the number of truckloads of refuse to be incinerated to half of last year's number. So what you're saying over here is that regardless of how much refuse that we collect, we are only going to send half as many truckloads as we sent last year for incineration. Even if I collect 10x as much refuse, I'm going to only send half as many truckloads as we sent last year for incineration. Can you see that? Read that line again. So even if you collect 10 times as much refuse, you are only going to send 5 truckloads for incineration. That's visualization. That's inferring information from the factual part. Questions on this? Questions on this? I see only one yes. People are you guys still reading the argument? No questions? Good. Can you please repeat? Yeah, I'm saying even if you collect 10 times as much refuse, what you are given over here is that we are only going to send half as many truckloads as we sent last year for incineration. Okay. So what's important with regards to the number of truckloads that we send is how many did we send last year. That's all that matters. You have to send half of last year. That's it. So if we sent 10 last year, then we're going to send 5 this year. That's given to us. 10x, 50x, 100x or more refuse is immaterial because we are given. This year, city services will separate for recycling enough refuse. What they're saying is, this is our job to reduce the number of truckloads of incineration of refuse to be incinerated to half of last year's number. It's going to be half of what's last year. Okay. So if we are only going to send half as many truckloads, then what's the only scenario in which we will get more than 50% of ash? What's the only scenario? The only scenario in which, if by burning half as many truckloads will generate more than 50%, is if ash per truckloads is more than what it was generated last year. Okay. What's recycled is irrelevant. What happens over there? Maybe they're not recycling. Maybe they're putting them in landfills. As long as they're not incinerating it, that's what we care about. Okay. So the only way we break this conclusion is if we pack these trucks so much, if we compact them and pack them up so much that every truckload generates more ash. That's the only way in which I'm going to falsify or break my conclusion down. Okay, that's the only scenario that's going to break my conclusion, which means that the assumption is that the ash per truckload is similar to or lower than what it was last year. Okay. With that, let's look at the answer choices. Choice A says this year no materials that city services could separate for recycling will be incinerated. What it's saying is whatever you separate for recycling, we're not going to burn that down. That's a must-be true condition, but it's already given in the argument. It doesn't provide any new information, hence it's incorrect. Choice B talks about the cost. We don't care about the cost. That's good. Okay. Choice C talks about the proportion of recyclable material. Again, proportion of recyclable material is not relevant here. Why? Because we're only going to send half as many truckloads. Okay. People who chose choice C, is this clear? That proportion is irrelevant because we're only going to send half as many truckloads. Choice D is our correct answer. Why? Because it talks about ash per truckload, which is what we came up with in our pre-thinking. So if you negate choice D, what you would really say is refused incinerated will generate more ash per truckload, and that breaks our conclusion down. Choice E, which was really popular, talks about the total quantity of refuse. It says, hey, it will be no greater, it will be either the same or less. Again, it's irrelevant. Why? Because we are only going to send half as many truckloads. So the total quantity of refuse is not relevant to what we have overall. Okay, let's kind of look at the argument once again over here. It's a great question. Shelby will refuse. So one of the things you've got to really look at this is what's the spirit of the argument. The goal really is to reduce the amount of residual ash to half of last year's total. Okay, and for that to be true, remember, what's the job of an assumption? What's the job of an assumption? The job of an assumption, and again, but no, that's the condition that it satisfies. What's the job of an assumption? Remember the pillar. Yes, to make sure that your conclusion doesn't break down. Okay. And in this, what are we trying to avoid? We're trying to avoid too much hash. So which is where this comes in true. We're trying to avoid too much hash, and which is where what we are saying is in choice D, okay, uh, that will generate uh, 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 will generate no more residual hash. Okay, it can generate the same, it can generate less, and if it generates less, I don't think anyone's going to blame the collection committee. In the context of this argument, is anyone going to blame the collection committee if it generates less hash? Instead of exactly 50%, if it generates 25% or 30%, no. And again, that's where get to the spirit of it as well. But again, good doubt, really good doubt overall. So where do we go from here? Okay. Um, and so one thing which I want to make sure you understand is that is doing well in CR is about a process, building those skills of visualization, building the skill of logical structure. And if you do that, you become efficient in answering questions. And you kind of saw evidence of this. If you have a really good understanding of the argument, you can reject answer choices really quickly. In this question, you could really understand that, hey, the total quantity of refuse not relevant. What the refuse was composed of not relevant. Overall, what you're going to do with recycling not relevant. Why? Because what you care about is what's incinerated, and what's incinerated is what's it's sent through trucks. Okay, and similarly in other arguments as well, you kind of figure out. So in highway miles, you figure out you have to focus on the total distance traveled, not on anything else. Okay. So how do you do that? I think the key thing with regards to getting to that 90th percentile is to build fundamentals, which means you've got to start with visualizing information when it on sentences. Folks who've gone through the e-GMAT CR course, or who have started going through the e-GMAT CR course, any of those over here? Anyone over here who's going through the CR course, who's gone through the CR course? For those of you who are going through the CR, not the free course, the paid one. For those of you who are going through the free course or to the paid course or have gone through it, what's the first module that we always go through? The first module that we go through is inference, and there's a reason for that. Why? Because we teach you how to visualize statements. And it's the longest module in the course because it's the most fundamental skill you have to build on, the ability to visualize sentences. Okay. Why? Because if you can't visualize it, you're going to falter. If you can't fully understand the conclusion, you're going to falter. If you can't build the structure of the argument, if you can visualize statements, but if you can't link them, you're going to falter. If you don't pre-think, which means if you don't collect all the information, you are going to falter. Okay. And then you have to do the same thing, which is visualize at the answer choice level as well. When you make a mistake, you're going to make a mistake because of one of these things. Again, there's another reason why you might make a mistake, which is you don't understand what an assumption is. You don't understand the job that a strengthener is supposed to do. But more often than not, people don't falter because of that. More often than not, people falter because of this. And that's kind of what the course builds on. Okay. When you do that, you get every CR question right. Okay. But you've got to do that one step at a time, which is where the ability to classify statements, put them into premise, conclusions, anti-premise, context, those buckets, that's something that we do up front. Then you go through the assumption module, which is where you build, or the inference module, which is where you build that skill of visualization. Again, you have 4 learning activities, about 10 hours of learning content just over here. And this is extremely, extremely crucial. Each of these, one of the things that I want to tell you is that each of these learning activities has feedback that's given to you. It's personalized to you. Make use of this feedback. If you for example score 67% here, make sure that that you go back, revise this module. That's absolutely essential. overall. Revise why you made mistakes, where your visualization went wrong. As you do this, you'll find that you will start to do better in subsequent files, and you'll build that confidence because you'd be choosing answers because you'll be getting things right because of the right reasons. Okay. How do you go, do the free trial? Just log into your e-GMAT account. If you're not a paid student, you'll land into the free trial. Then you go through the assumption module. This is the assumption module in the free trial. You'll go through that. This is the assumption module in the paid course. Again, extremely important. Make sure you practice visualization in every argument type, whether it evaluates your logical gaps, comparing two entities, comparing segments, comparing entities and segments together, or those quant focused concepts. Then make sure you go through the application files. Again, make use of this feedback over here, do revisions, and then go through those practice files. This is just the learning part of the course. But even in the learning part of the course, in all of this, you have about 45 complete arguments that focus just on assumptions. Okay. Then do the same thing with evaluate. You can see there's, as we go further, there's way more application, way more practice, and way less concepts, because when you build the fundamentals, then you go through this a lot faster. But 60% of your time goes in assumption, inference and assumption. The remainder of that 40%, and the remainder of that 40%, you go through evaluate, strengthen, weaken, and logically completes, paradox, boldface, everything. Once you do this, if you are an e-GMATer, make sure you do the cementing quizzes. Start with cementing medium, then hard. As you're doing this, we have an error log module. Make sure you build the error log, understand why you're making mistakes. As you do that, you see this is this threshold over here. You will cross that threshold. And you may not do that in the first go, but you will do that, which is why we have 9 cementing quizzes in over here. And as you get better, what you're going to find, and this is a chart from our Scholaranium module, that your accuracy is going to go up and your time to answer questions is going to go down simultaneously. This is what you do after you go through the course. Okay. Now, if you're aiming for that 90th percentile, this is hard accuracy in the last 20 questions. This is what you're looking at. Okay. This is 75% accuracy in hard questions, gets you to about 97th percentile in CR. Okay. Here's a guy who went from 570 to 740. He went to talk. He says language has a way of manipulating your mind, and the GMAT is particularly good at using language to fool you, to make you think that you got the right answer. Many of you kind of experience some of this today. Spend those 5 to 10 extra seconds, and you'd stay focused, and you'd be able to reject answer choices. Okay. With that, try the free trial out, and if you need help with building your study plan, I can share a link. You can do that. But I'd like to get some feedback on the webinar. Let me put in short on support. How did you find the webinar? And I'm going to share the session PDF as well. What did you learn? How did you if you need your study plan, that's a link over here. Again, if you're an e-GMAT student, you already have access to the PSP tool. Too fast for you, then go through the recording. And for those of you who are not connected with me on LinkedIn, make sure you connect with me on LinkedIn. We post lots of updates on what's going on in the B School world. So make sure you do that. And if you're looking for what strategies do students use to get scholarships, look at link number 4 over here. When will the recording be available? The recording will be available at about 3 p.m. IST or 5:30 in the morning Eastern Standard Time. Okay, or in other words, in about 4 hours or so. Okay. All right, guys, with that, if you have questions, you can ask those questions at this point. Otherwise, I want to thank you guys for joining me. I want to thank you guys for enthusiastically participating in the webinar. Okay. All right, with that, good luck and have a wonderful day.